me just note that from a moment there, Fred Anklin, one of the editors with the Missourian, was on, but he seems to be gone now. So,
Okay.
There you
okay. At any
There's
rate,
Fred. He's got the thing working. That's great.
okay. Um, thank you, David, and I'm very pleased to introduce our speaker today, Brianna Lennon, our Boone County Clerk extraordinaire. Brianna was first elected as Boone County Clerk in November 2018 and re-elected in 2022 for a second term. She is a graduate of Truman State University and holds a master's in public policy and a law degree, both from the University of Missouri. Prior to her election as Boone County Clerk, Brianna served as an Assistant Attorney General in the Consumer Protection Division of the Missouri Attorney General's Office before joining the Missouri Secretary of State's office under former Secretary of State Jason Kander. In this position, she worked closely with local election authorities across the state to ensure that elections were simple, secure, and accessible for all voters. Welcome, Brianna.
Thank you for having me. I don't have a PowerPoint for a formal presentation, but I appreciate the invitation to come and talk. I think that there are a lot of questions that I'm also happy to field after I kind of give initial conversation about the 2026 upcoming election cycle, some of the things that we are seeing at the county clerk level right now, and just kind of give a general overview of elections. I know that most everyone on this call are very familiar with the elections process, so I'm not going to belabor talking about like all of the different elements of voter registration and things like that. I'm going to jump into some of the things that we're doing in our office, and then some important dates of deadlines of things that are coming up next year, and then some things that we are watching that will impact next year but are happening now, which should come as no surprise to anybody, but I do like to share the county clerk's perspective on some of these things. So first, I will just say that next week is National Voter Registration Day on the 16th. September is National Voter Registration Month. For our office, how we celebrate it in odd numbered years is that we have an I Voted sticker design contest, and this will be our fourth I Voted sticker design contest. Students at high school age, or if they're homeschooled in the equivalent of 9th through 12th grade, will be eligible to submit I Voted sticker design. We've gotten anywhere from like 88 to 150 designs in the past. They get narrowed down from a community group of judges that we have that help us to narrow them down to 4 or 5 so that people can vote on them. And then we put those up for a public vote, very informal public vote that anybody can vote on. And the winner of that competition gets to be our I Voted sticker design for the next 2026 and 2027 elections. We started doing this in 2019. It's been really well received, and the students love doing it. So I'm excited to see what they come up with this year. But if you know anybody that has a high school student or know a high school student, feel free to let them know that that is going to start next week so that they can participate. And they can submit their designs on our website, so they don't have to mail them or anything. If they've made some rendering as a JPEG or a PNG or a PDF, whatever they want to do, they can upload it to us and we will include that in the submissions. So that is next week. And we are also preparing for a November special election, which will just include the Hallsville area. So Hallsville School District has 2 things on the ballot. Hallsville City has something on the ballot. The full list of that language and what's on the ballot is on our website already. There will be if you include the Boone County Government Center, there will be 3 polling places open for that election. So it's relatively small. We're not really going to need a ton of election judges for it because we only have 3 polling places, but it's still an important election. And so if you are in Hallsville or know anybody that's in Hallsville, we'll be doing the same things we always do. Sample ballots will go out about 4 weeks before the election. We will have some no excuse absentee voting opportunities before Election Day in our office, but also the Saturday before the election, we will be at, our office will be open, but we'll also be at Hallsville Baptist Church so that people can come by. We'll be in their parking lot for being able to vote before Election Day. So all those opportunities are still there. And after we get through the November election, we will be right into preparation for both April and the primary. So after the November election, candidate filing for the April election, so any of the open school board and city seats, that all happens in December. So I know people are already interested. We've already gotten, like data requests from campaigns that are planning to run for the April election. So keep your eyes out for those notices. And then, of course, candidate filing for 2026 will happen at the end of February of next year. So that's something that I always try to point out to people is even when people say that they've announced that they're going to be running or they plan to be running for a particular race for the midterm election, they are not officially a candidate until they file, and they can't file until the end of February of 2026. So that's when everything will really be set in stone. People will put their names on the ballot, make their decisions, and move forward in campaigning to be on the August ballot, and then hopefully make through to the November election. So those are the basic kind of things that are happening when it comes to the election itself. What we are keeping track of right now with the special session that is happening is primarily redistricting. The County Clerks Association, which is all of the county clerks and then the boards of elections in the eastern and western parts of the state, they are all in agreement that there are some constraints and limitations when it comes to the timing of when we can actually do the redistricting that's happening. We sent a letter 2 weeks ago to the governor's office, the Secretary of State's office, and then House and Senate leadership to let them know that their practical considerations are that while there are maps that are rendered using GIS or some sort of technology-driven mapping system, when it gets down to the level of the county, where we actually have to tie voters specifically to districts, it is not nearly that sophisticated. We have to take the maps that are provided to us and turn them into address ranges in a very manual way. So if a district cuts across Ash, for example, in Columbia, then we have to do it by address range. 100 through 105 is in this district, and 106 through 110 is in this other district. It takes a while. We just did it in 2021 and 2022, so we're very familiar with how long the process takes. And while not every county is affected by this, I mean, some of them just changed the congressional number, ours is very, very affected by the lines that I am seeing right now. I have told people and have no problem telling people we have not received any maps, we have not received any data. So right now, county clerks don't have any other information other than what's publicly available to everybody about what those maps look like. So it's hard for me right now to know whether the lines that are being proposed in Boone County follow any obvious census tracts or district lines or precinct lines. And if they don't, then that means that not only are we refiguring addresses to go with the congressional districts, but we're also potentially changing the precinct boundaries as well. So it's really important that we get that information as early as possible, and if that information is finalized as early as possible. If we end up in a situation where the map is redrawn, and then the map goes into litigation, and then the litigation continues through, let's say, July of next year, there is really no window of opportunity after that point in the county schedule to be able to actually update a map to make that work for either the primary or the continuing general election. So there are realities to this, that just because a map passes in July does not mean that we can turn around and run an election on new maps. And that's something that we wanted to make sure that the state was aware of, and that the decision makers, the legislators, were aware of as well. So we're following that with a lot of interest. In addition to the obvious counties that are impacted, like Jackson County and St. Louis and St. Charles, Webster County down south is also one that is impacted, just like Boone County is. So there are quite a few counties that are watching this with great interest, and just hoping that we get information sooner rather than later if something is to happen. I think the greatest concern is just being expected to do something at the last minute that we are kind of hamstrung and can't do. A lot of the limitations come from the way that the statewide voter registration database is programmed. It's a pretty old voter registration database. I don't know what the likelihood is that it would be updated. It's maintained by the Secretary of State's office. So adding in functionality that would help, like integration with GIS, which is what the mapping software is, would certainly be helpful, but right now is not something that we have available to us. If that changes, that can change what our constraints are on getting this done. I did also want to bring up, since these things have all been in the news anyway, I figured I would just bring them up in case people had questions about them earlier. There had been some news, it was national news as well, that some counties had been contacted by the Department of Justice to have access to voting machines that were used in 2020. We have not been one of those counties. As far as I am aware, there are only 2 counties that have been contacted, and in both of those situations, those counties told the Department of Justice that they could not have access to those machines, and that it is not legal under Missouri law to provide access to voting machines, even to the federal government. It would really compromise the integrity of our elections if we had voting equipment that was just handed over to other people. It would also, I think, cast a lot of doubt on the trust of our elections if there's no true chain of custody of how these voting machines were inspected or touched or things like that. I also remind people that even to be used in our county, any voting machine that we purchase gets tested by the Election Assistance Commission first, so it's approved at the federal level. That system then gets approved at the state level, so the Secretary of State's office has an opportunity to review it, make sure that it's working properly, make sure that that it meets all of the different criteria in Missouri's law. And then once they approve it, counties are able to then go and purchase it and use it. And even after we've purchased it, that's not the end of the line where it comes to making sure that it's working correctly. All of our equipment is tested before the election by a bipartisan team. It's tested before the election by a bipartisan team, so they come in and they run a test deck of ballots through it to make sure that the machine is counting everything accurately, because we want to make sure the tabulation is going to be correct. And then after Election Day, It's basically tested twice, once by running a test deck through again, but another by having a bipartisan team come in and hand count the ballots that have been run through 5% of our machines, and making sure that the results of that match the results of what came out of the machine on election night. Those have never been out of sorts. They have been an exact match every time. And that's true for, I think, any of the counties that you would talk to in the state of Missouri. We all use election equipment as a tool. We don't trust it implicitly. It gets tested. It gets tested before and after the election. And it's an important tool that we have because it makes sure that we can do things efficiently, but also accurately. It also is a really great fraud prevention because one of the reasons over time that we've moved to using voting equipment is that it's really easy if you're doing hand counting ballots for somebody to try to kind of mess with the ballots in some way. If you're just putting them into a machine to be tabulated and then you're checking them after and you can account for every single one of those ballots, there's a lot more assurance that nothing has gone wrong and that all of the ballots are exactly as they were marked by the voters that cast them. It keeps the voters private, keeps it independent, and so it's really great that we have this system that's set up. But I did at least want to call attention to the fact that we have had some requests from the Department of Justice, and no equipment in Missouri has been turned over to them at this point. Since I was just on the topic of the letter, I did see that in the chat there were a couple of questions, so I was just going to say, for redistricting, the letter that we sent out on behalf of the association that dealt with redistricting, we got confirmation back from the governor's office that they had received it. That at this point is the only confirmation that we've gotten. And then another question was, aside from the difficulty that comes with quickly organizing an election on new maps, what are the other implications and impacts of redistricting in Boone County? And I think it's hard to say because the redistricting that happened in 2022 was the first time recently that Boone County was split across congressional districts. And I think based on the questions that we got from the public, based on the reactions that people had when they found out that if you lived north of Broadway, you were in one district and south of Broadway was in another, it was concerning to a lot of voters, and there was a lot of confusion about why that would have been the case. And unfortunately, at the county level, we don't have answers to those things. Redistricting is not something that we get to have a say in, but we do have to deal with the consequences of it. So we tried to do as much public education as possible. And what was beneficial about the 2022 cycle was that we had time to do all of that. I think one of the impacts of redistricting being done this way is that we do not have that kind of time. We are so close to candidate filing starting in February. Sounds like it's really far away, but it's not. And so we're in a place where if those lines change, yes, we're already split in half, but this is a completely different split. This is the entirety of the city of Columbia, or most of all of the city of Columbia. It's not clear from the maps. I'm not sure if those lines follow the city of Columbia lines or not, or if some people that live in Columbia will be in a different district. But explaining that to voters is really important, because they're going to get their sample ballot and they're going to wonder why their neighbor has a different sample ballot than they do. And the more time we have to provide that information, the better. I think that as much as for those of us that like live and breathe this every day, we all know this is happening. There are 120,000 voters in this county. They're not all aware that redistricting is happening right now. And the first time they're going to find out about it will be during the first election for the primary, and public education is important on that. The more time we have to do it is important. That's what's going to change voting. I have said lots of times, I think one of the things that depresses voter turnout the most is just confusion about the process, about the information about it, about why something's happening. If people don't understand why they're participating, then they don't want to participate. And redistricting plays a huge role in that. There was another question about how to be part of the voting machine verification team from Dave, who is one of our wonderful supervisors anyway. I would say if you have any interest, if you've been a poll worker before, an election judge before, we do try to bring in like experienced election judges because we want to make sure that they are aware of the whole process, but we're also happy to bring in people that just have a really big interest in it and have never done it before and want to. So you can always email us, reach out to our office, and then when we are going through the preparation part of getting testing ready, then we can call you. I will say sometimes we need more teams and sometimes we need less teams based on how big the election is. August primaries have so many different ballot styles that sometimes it helps to have more than one team doing the testing. But for like this upcoming election, we literally will have 3 ballot styles. So a test deck will have 3 ballots in it. So that doesn't really require that many people. It just requires one little team. Yes, and to Dave's point, if you have any concerns about anything that happens with elections or equipment, or you want to know more about it, signing up to be an election judge is the best way to find out more about it, see what the safeguards are, see how you can be part of the process and see behind the scenes, because I think that that is one of the best ways, not only to educate yourself, but like to just, you know more about the process and share with your friends and neighbors about how the process works. Because I think it's really easy. County clerks especially have fallen prey to people saying, well, I know how it works here, but maybe stuff is happening over there that I don't know about. And we're trying to do better ourselves, me and my colleagues, of saying like, there are fundamental checks and balances in this process. I trust, just like I trust that we are doing it here, that county is doing it correctly as well, because by and large they are. This is a really great group of people. I have never met a local election administrator that didn't care very deeply about making sure that their elections had a great deal of integrity, that they were working as hard as they could and their staff was working as hard as they could to make sure voters had good experiences and were doing everything possible to make sure their voices were heard. So being an election judge helps bring you into that group of people, and is just a really great experience. So yes, feel free to reach out anytime to sign up, and you can go to our website specifically where we have a poll worker sign up, and I will put that in the chat as well. In Missouri, poll worker and election judge are used kind of interchangeably because people think of poll workers, even though Missouri calls them election judges. I'm just going to start taking questions unless there's anything that I really failed spectacularly to go over, but I think that we're going to have questions. So I see Mari's hand is raised. Oh, you're on mute.
Sorry.
Okay.
I just thank you for being here with us today and sharing all this information. My question has to do with the parameters. Are there any parameters set forth constitutionally in our state with respect to congressional redistricting? I know there are very specific requirements for the legislative redistricting, but are there requirements that they have, like contiguous districts that don't divide political entities or any of that?
I would love to say that I knew the answer to that, but I do not know the answer to that.
Okay.
I am not as well versed on that particular issue about what's constitutionally available. But I have heard it as I've been following along. I've heard that come up a few times about trying to figure out whether that is a concern or not. So I think that's one of the concerns at the clerk level that we have is that's pretty indicative that there will be litigation about it, and I think there already is litigation about it. So that's going to have an impact on the timing if and when maps occur. And this is all assuming that redistricting is successful in the legislature. That is still ongoing as well. There's another question in the chat, which is a great question as well, one that we get from our sitting election judges. In recent years, have there been instances or challenges of non-judge observers at voting sites? So we have had a long history of having what would be called challengers at our polling places during major elections. And we did have a handful. It's never been a ton. It's always been county-wide, somewhere between 5 and 10. It's not a very popular thing, I guess, to do. Challengers, however, have very limited roles on what they can do. They can't stop a voter from voting. They can't even really talk to a voter. They can't interfere with a voter. All that they can do is if they have a concern, they can write it down, and then they can ask the poll workers that work there about it. And if that makes them unhappy, they can call me and they can talk to me about it. We have not ever had any challengers that have brought anything that they haven't been totally satisfied about when they've asked if they've had a question. But I'll also add in, I know that there have been questions about like intimidation and things like that, where not sanctioned election challengers show up. We have not had that in Boone County. We have been very fortunate that our elections have been very, very peaceful when it comes to like going to vote and outside our polling places and things like that. I know that that's not the case everywhere, but here it's been really good. We have added in over the last few years some conflict de-escalation tips and training into our election judge training, just so that we can provide that to them to reference. And of course, we also always tell them, as Dave can attest to, if anything comes up that you feel is above your pay grade, you can always bounce that to us. We're happy to take those calls. I'm happy to talk to anybody. And we've been really fortunate. The presidential election was very smooth. All of our local elections have been very smooth. I think most of the times if we ever have a concern about something, it's like an electioneer of somebody that's campaigning on behalf of somebody, and they might not know that they have to stay outside 25 feet outside of the polling place area. But that's just education, and we will educate them. Yeah, Xavier has a question.
Hi. So even though the county was split in 2022, do you think that the more recent redistricting has anything to do with the larger redistricting efforts we see across the country?
For Boone, and I'll be very candid, because I think that this was something that happened. This was a conversation that happened after the 2024 election. We had a challenger that was at our office on election night. I can't remember if we had only posted like a small number of results or if we had posted no results at all yet. And the 3rd and 4th congressional races were already called. Boone County's results had not been reported to any any relevant amount, and they had already called the 3rd and the 4th congressional. So I say that to say that I am not sure with how 2022's maps were, or even probably the ones prior to that. I think there's probably an acknowledgement that Boone County doesn't have a great deal of voting block power in any of the districts that it's in. And I'm not seeing that change in what has been proposed in the new maps either. So when these districts come in and they include a large portion of Kansas City or St. Louis, in both cases, because that's what we have right now. We have part of St. Louis and part of Kansas City areas, and we would have the same thing in this map. Our population doesn't rise to the level of really changing what those results are going to be. So given that fact, I don't know that we're going to see anything really different. My bigger concern is that in the 2022 maps, there was a great deal of consideration given to where our precinct lines and everything else already were, so that it made sense, like it made logical sense of where the lines, where the boundary was. And I am not confident that that is what we're seeing in the proposed maps, because it really looks like it's just kind of a wiggly line around parts of Columbia, and that doesn't follow any traditional precincts that we have. And that's really going to cause some problems for us.
Okay, thank you.
Great, there's another question about recruiting judges. I actually think we've gotten to the point where we're not like fundamentally understaffed when it comes to Republican judges like we may have been in the past. We're still okay. I mean, I think to find enough election judges in general, sometimes it can be hard in larger elections, but we are seeing some more success. I think we've tried to do more outreach. We've tried to get more ways that people can serve. And you're right that it has an impact on the number of polling places that we can run. But I think we have seemed to have hit the sweet spot of, for our core group of polling places, we have between 43 and 45 polling locations. And that's dependent right now on, there's a polling place that was not available, like they turned us down, and we're trying to get back in there. And if we can, then that's great. But that core group, we feel pretty confident that we can staff that core. Where we end up sticking to, like, the November 2024 election, we were at 60 polling locations, and that seemed to work really well, and we could staff it really well. So I think we have hit a sweet spot, mostly because we now have the 2 weeks of no excuse absentee voting. That has a huge impact on how many people are turning out on election day. So that's given us some breathing room when it comes to how many judges we need. And to your other point about the rules of requiring them, that's a great question. So we are required to have bipartisan balance at every polling place. So we normally have at least 4 judges at every poll, and they have to be equally distributed, Republican and Democrat. We do have independent judges too, but we absolutely have to have a Democratic and Republican supervisor at each of those polling locations. So it's important to have that balance, and that is why it has an impact on how many polls we can open, because if we can't find enough supervisors to offset, we have so many Democrats, we need so many Republicans to have so many polls. I feel like we've hit a pretty good equilibrium right now, which I say that now, and it's possible that in April of next year, we're banging down doors trying to get people to be election judges, but I think that that's just the job. Mari has another question.
Yeah, this is broadening the discussion from redistricting a little bit, but I keep hearing actions being taken at the federal level around citizenship verification for voters. And could you talk a little bit about how that, what effect those have and how that will impact us locally?
Yes, that is a great question, and I am going to put in the chat, this is if you are nerdy like me and you want to see a really cool article that just came out from the Bipartisan Policy Center. That, I mean, like literally just came out 3 days ago. So with the conversation about citizenship and documented proof of citizenship, or even just accessing databases that are available at the federal level, there is very little that would, if it were to happen through the SAVE Act or something like that, the big concern about the conversations at the federal level of requiring citizenship are that the onus is on the voter in most of those conversations for the voter to have to come in and show proof of citizenship. That's not the only way of proving citizenship. In fact, there are several states that already have some sort of requirement, but it's not putting the burden on the voter to do it. It is simply taking the voter registration information and checking it against what is the SAVE database that exists right now. It's not a perfect match, but it is a database of information that's available. The list maintenance report that I mentioned, I think where the impact that we're going to see is that adding in all these requirements for either documented proof of citizenship or just checking citizenship in general without putting very much thought into what that looks like what happens if it comes back and somebody's not a citizen? Do we add them to the roll anyway and just mark them as rejected? Do we put them in as pending? Do we send them a letter? Like all of those practical considerations, nobody's having those conversations. And those are going to have to happen at the local level and the state level everywhere. And it kind of gets talked about in that report. But I liken it to years ago in the 90s. That was the first time that we started getting the last four numbers of your social security number on your voter registration. Up to that point, that had not happened before. It was just give me your name and your address and your date of birth and your occupation in some cases, and you're registered to vote. When the conversation happened to add the last four of your social or your driver's license number, which was part of the National Voter Registration Act at the federal level, there was a whole mechanism of once you get a driver's license number, you can check that against your DMV, and if it's okay, then that's great. If you don't have that, if you have your social security number, if you check that against your Social Security Administration and it checks out, then that's great. If it's not, you need to reach out to them. It created these mechanisms of things. These kind of broad sweeping edicts where you're like, well, now you have to show proof of citizenship, but you don't put any consideration into how that actually works in practice, is where we end up with mass confusion again. And so I know there hasn't really been much pushed at the state level for this. If there was something pushed at the state level, then we would be pushing to have those conversations. And at the federal level, I think that the fact that Bipartisan Policy Center, and for full disclosure, I'm on their their elections task force, and so I feel very strongly that this is a really good report about how to make sure that we have accurate voter lists, which in theory is what the point of having a citizenship check is for. You have to be able to dig into the weeds and have these conversations. Otherwise, the result will be confusion. So that's my concern, is making sure that we have forethought in this process and that we're doing it responsibly, and looking at the states that are doing it responsibly. Florida does this, Arizona does this, and they do it. I've talked to their local election officials. They do it in a fair way. They do it in a way that gives voters an opportunity to fix it if there's a mistake, and doesn't do it in a way that really burdens all the voters. Herb has a question.
Here comes a hot potato. I want to compliment you and several of your predecessors for the effort that you make to get people registered. Please accept that compliment. I went to a wellness fair this morning and had a great delight. You had a table there. Thank you. But we do not have the kind of turnout of voters in our elections in Columbia and Boone County that I would like to see. Everyone knows, I think, and I've heard Dave Luthol speak it too, that low turnout correlates with several things, among them how long the ballot and how frequent the elections. People sometimes scheme to get an issue on the ballot in August when very few people come out, or in April when it's a little better, but still not good. What can we do to educate people about the consequences of long and too frequent elections?
I think that is an excellent question. And thank you for the compliment. I'll take it. You're right. I think voter registration is kind of the bare minimum that we're providing, but it really is trying to get people that are already registered to turn out and vote. For length of ballot, I think that's one of the I think length of ballot and frequency of elections tend to go hand in hand. And there have been a lot of proposals in the legislature trying to consolidate particular elections. Sometimes in the name of having turnout for more local things so that there isn't a situation where somebody is saying, well, I didn't know that this tax levy was on the ballot for this school district because they, put it on a ballot that was a small election. So the thought was put it on a bigger election and then more people will turn out to vote on it. But then you have the very real issue of people getting ballot fatigue and they don't want to finish filling out the ballot. So my personal proposal has been, if you want to consolidate things onto a federal election ballot, which is already going to be long, put all the local stuff on top. Make us put all the local stuff on top, and before you get to president, you have to read through everything else that's on it. It hasn't really gone over well, but I think it's a good idea. If you're really wanting people to vote on local stuff, and that's the reason you want it to be consolidated. I think you're right, too. It is really difficult when we're constantly asking people to go to the polling place, though, especially when it is in a time where you wouldn't expect there to be an election. This year has been the most elections that we've ever had for an off season, like a odd numbered year. But if you look back, it actually was pretty common. 10 years ago, there were a lot of these elections. So I'm not sure. It would be really interesting to do a study about why now and why then and not in the middle. But I do think that it has an impact on whether people turn out. Sometimes to the opposite, it's a little interesting, like the fact that we had to have a separate Rocheport election because of it not being on the April ballot. We had a separate Rocheport election in May. A bunch of people turned out for that because they had their own special election and they, all wanted to participate in it. So I think some of it is getting people to understand what is on the ballot when these elections happen, which we hope sending out sample ballots helps with that, but a lot of it comes down to whoever's putting something on the ballot or whatever the issue is on the ballot. That's got to be the story of why you should care that there's an election that's coming up. I'm not sure that there is a one-size-fits-all solution for it. But again, I think a lot of it just comes down to people don't expect there to be elections that are happening right now. And so to be able to consistently give a schedule of here's when they are, I always feel terrible that I have to tell people, yeah, you're always going to have an April election. There will always be an April election. But sometimes maybe August and November in an odd numbered year. I mean, that's not really great. I don't feel good saying that. So if we were having conversations about odd numbered years and stuff, I think other states, every state has a different election calendar. I think it would be worth looking at some of the other ones to see which ones do it better. Kathy has a question.
I have two. The first one's probably a pretty quick one. is one of the Hallsville issues, it was, I think, a bond issue that there was some kind of technicality about earlier, and they had to redo it?
Yes.
Okay.
The
And
other
then-
one is that actually Hallsville Schools is really going through it right now, because they do have to have that bond redone. They're the only district in Boone County that had to have the bond redone. There were 3 bonds on the April election, and 2 of them are going through, and 1 did not. And so Hallsville has to do it again. But Hallsville is also in a situation where they are swept up in a new statute that requires, if you are a school district that touches a city that has more than 30,000 residents, that you have to go to the ballot if you want a 4-day school week. And Hallsville's been a 4-day school week for years. Their school board made that decision, and it now has to go to a vote of the people. So there's some litigation about that anyway, because it was somewhat directed at independent schools. And now I think something like 80 districts have been swept up in the way that the law was written. So they are suing about that, but it hasn't been resolved. So they're on the ballot for their bond, and then also this 4-day school week issue. And then Hallsville City is making another attempt at passing a use tax.
My goodness. My other question is, there was a network that I think it was Jay Ashcroft withdrew Missouri from, and I can't remember the name of that network. It sounded very useful, and I'm wondering if you've seen what kind of consequences you've seen from Missouri being out of that.
Yeah, that's a great question. So that dovetails into the voter list maintenance conversation, because it was called ERIC. It's the Electronic Registration Information Consortium, something like that, collective. It's a network of, it's actually a nonprofit, and all the states that are members of that group are they're the board, so they control what happens on it. But the point of the board and the point of the program is that all the states are in it agree to data sharing, and then that information is then provided to the secretaries of state to provide to the local election authorities to keep their list maintenance up to date. So I get already a list from Missouri's Department of Health and Human Services of everybody that's passed away that matches to a voter in our list. But I don't get that from Illinois or Texas or anywhere else. So if you are a Boone County resident that passes away out of state, I'm never going to get a record of that. And that person will eventually be taken off the list, because we go through a canvass process, and if we send you mail and it bounces back to us after inactivity in a certain amount of years, you will get dropped off the list. But certainly it's much more efficient, and it's much better if we get that information earlier. So we haven't seen, being part of the program gave us access to reports. We don't have those reports anymore. That does give us a lag in the time that we have getting good information. So it definitely was not ideal that we got pulled out of the system. I would much prefer to have stayed in the system and be in the system. But that is one of the ways a lot of other states are keeping their lists up to date. Again, though, when you're talking about something like a cross-state match or something like that, it's important, the more states that you can get to join, the better information you have. So Missouri pulling out of ERIC at all was a disservice to all of the surrounding states as well that no longer got Missouri's information. There's 2 questions in the chat that I can answer really quick. One is about initiative petition things. Another one that, like the redistricting, I do not know the constitutional limitations of whether that language is legal or not, but that is certainly something that is coming up during the special session, is initiative petition. And then the other one, which I definitely can answer, is how can a voter with a disability get on a list to be able to vote from home without needing a notary? That is a great question. We do have a list called a permanent disability list. It's part of state statute. And if you are a voter that is confined to being at home or you have a permanent disability, you can get on this list, and that list entitles you to us sending you an absentee ballot application every year. You don't automatically get the ballot itself, but you will get an application about 9 or 10 weeks before each election. You can sign that application that we send you because we pre-fill it out with your information, and then we will send you an absentee ballot. And if you are voting by mail because you have a disability or because you have an illness or you're confined to your home, you are exempt from the requirement that you have that ballot notarized. So if you are, if you want to pass that information on to people, that's great. If you know somebody or you are somebody that is mostly homebound or you have a disability, you can get your ballot sent to you. You don't have to do anything other than fill it out, sign it, put it back in your mailbox, mail it back to us, and we will get it.
Yes, that confirms I've been helping my mother, who died in February at the age of 95, and I think the last 6 or 7 years in Indiana. They sent us the application, then they sent us the ballot, and she did not have to have it notarized. And she was always very anxious to get her vote recorded. Once you got to realize that it could be done, and that people around her could make that possible for her, because she couldn't see very well either. I know that gets into areas that that they keep telling us about. I don't know if we have any other question here. I did have one myself. You know, we saw a lot of stuff from Michigan and other states of the night of counting votes, and I did that with the last term of Wendy Norton. The very last night of counting votes, I think, was when Trump was first elected. It was quite a night. And tell us what happens in your office, in the counting chamber, as far as having, I was one of the observers, I think, from the Democratic Party, and there was a Republican cohort there, but there were also bipartisan groups working there. So maybe a little bit about when people challenge us that, you know, your office is doing what they want on the night of the election. It's not that way at all. It's a pretty strict thing going on.
Yeah, so that's a great question. So the bipartisanship doesn't stop at the polling place. When we have, like I said, for testing, we have bipartisan teams, but on election day and on election night, we have a bipartisan team that is in our counting room. Our counting room has the computer that is not connected to the internet that can import in the tabulated results as they come in on election night. So after the polls close, the supervisors from each polling location drive together in the same car to our office. They have the ballots themselves, the voted ballots themselves, and they have the USB drive that comes out of the tabulator machine. And they check in our office, and then in our office is the bipartisan team to watch what's happening, and any observers that are in there to watch what's happening. And our staff puts those USB drives into the computer to accumulate all of the results. And when those come in, we're also checking to make sure that we get a certificate that comes back that the election judges have filled out that say, this is how many people were checked in at my poll, this is how many ballots we had at our poll, and we check those with everything. So when we put a USB in and it says, hey, there's 211 ballots on this USB, we look at the certificate that was written by the election judges and say, yeah, they said there were 211 people checked in and there were 211 ballots cast here. So the results having 211 makes perfect sense. And once all of that is all checked, that's when we release the unofficial results on election nights. So all those things are checked with the view of having a bipartisan team there to make sure that everything's working properly. And then that is still not the end of things, because when we're done with the election, we still go through a certification process. That includes that post-test of the election and the hand counting that I mentioned to make sure that all of the tabulators were working correctly on election day. So that's also why the results themselves say unofficial, to make sure that people know, hey, there's still some other things that we do to double check that make sure that nothing went wrong, everything was done properly, everything was done accurately before we sign off on it. And we have another bipartisan team that comes in that signs off on everything being done correctly as well, called the verification board.
Thank you.
Kathy has a question.
Yes, you do such a wonderful job of explaining things. And I was wondering if you are being invited ever to speak to high school classes here in Columbia or elsewhere in Boone County about the election process, so that, because I think it is so wonderful to hear how safeguarded our elections are. And I think it is so important that people know this. And the other place I wondered if if you're participating in, is that civic or like citizens class, whatever it is that Columbia is doing.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so we're always like usually the last like capstone. Oh, you learned all about the city during this I love the Citizens Academy. And so at the end, they're like, here's a county day. And they come over here and I teach them about elections, and they learn about, they got a tour of the assessor's office last time. So they learn about all the different elements, but we make sure that they get a really good understanding of elections too. I will say I haven't been into high school classes, but what we've done at both the high school and the middle school level is mock elections, where we've gotten them experience with, and they use our actual voting equipment. We program ballots for them with the questions that they want. Sometimes it's like a student council race. Sometimes, like in Douglas High School had made like a whole unit out of it, where they came up with ballot language for different issues that they wanted to talk about. They had students that served as poll workers. They had like a roster that they used for their check-in list. They did everything. It was fantastic. So we try to get them involved from that perspective, because we get, well, two things. One is that on a personal level, I have a fifth grader who I just saw go through the citizenship unit like last year and this year. And he's got a pretty decent sense of how the process works, like how government works, but he doesn't know the practicalities of things. And that's kind of echoed when we talk to high school students. They feel really intimidated by the process. Not that they don't understand why it's important to cast their ballot, but that they're like, there's a machine and I got to mark something and I don't know what I'm supposed to have or do things. And so when we do the mock elections, we hear a lot of people say, oh my gosh, that was so easy. I don't feel nearly as nervous anymore. And so we're trying to bridge that gap so that people participate.
Yeah, I like that, fitting in with what you said earlier about if you start messing with the election, with the redistricting, splitting people who can no longer talk about their congressman and their they get confused knowing where they are and what they're voting. That can also discombobulate, and we need to somehow tell them that it's okay, you're going to be able to vote anyway, but too much messing makes that hard to do, like you were able to do with those students. We're getting close to our time. You have another more inside the ballpark questions from your friend and often colleague Dave Taylor about the voting machines and things like that.
I can answer those real quick.
All righty.
So Dave was referring to having poll print machines at every polling place someday, or upgrading the touchscreen ballot marking devices. Both of those things are, I think, they're a little bit impacted by the discussion that's been happening about what the next generation of voting equipment is going to look like. We upgraded last year and bought poll prints that are not, they're not tabulators. They don't have anything to do with like anything other than printing the ballot that the voter needs, which has made it really wonderful at our central polling locations to be able to not have to overprint a bunch of ballots that are not going to be used. This way, they just get to have the ones that they need. And that's worked really well. We do that for absentee voting too. It's been a huge advantage to doing them. There are places that do those all over. St. Louis County is one of them. They don't use this particular equipment, and this particular equipment can be a little unwieldy. It's very large and heavy. But I think what we're going to see in the next generation of voting equipment, because of so many conversations about like it's cyclical, where we started with touchscreens that actually counted your vote, and now we're at touchscreens that just print out a ballot, but the ballot doesn't look like a full paper ballot. It looks like a little slip of paper. I think we're going to end up with where St. Louis is, which is a touchscreen that prints out a full ballot. And once you start talking about a touchscreen that prints out a full ballot, then you can start having conversations like, well, why wouldn't we just do those everywhere? Or why wouldn't we have places that have multiple printers at different things? And that's how St. Louis has gotten to where it is. We were not fortunate enough when we were buying equipment in 2019 to have that be a possibility. The equipment St. Louis County has, it wasn't available to us at that time. They were still going through certification and things. So I think, you know, we bought new equipment in 2019 that was first purchased in 2006. That's too long to go with how fast technology moves. So I'm hopeful that, you know, even using something from 2019, that means it's 7 years old. We use that for another few years. 10-year-old technology, there will be a new round of generations. So I'm hopeful that when we start having that conversation of, let's do our full replacement, it's time for a full replacement, then that's going to be the conversation. We can print at every location and make it easier for everybody.
I think I will.
To allay Dave's fears, though, we will do things nibbling around the edges in between that time that hopefully make it where we can incorporate poll prints somehow, because they are really great, and I do want to be able to use them more.
I think I will call this meeting. Our county clerk has a lot to do, and a lot of people, fortunately, a lot of good people to do it with. And besides that, since my time, Brianna, you have been our most frequent guest speaker. We demand that you show up around certain issues, and sometimes you ask us for the ability to come and explain new things to us. I don't know which that was this time,
I think it was a combination.
but a little combination, right? There was more there than we thought at this point, and we're concerned about things. It is such a relief to hear from you every time, and especially now, because I feel like, you know, democracy's good. We have people in government like Brianna Lennon. I wish you were, you know, Secretary of State maybe, or one of her colleagues happened to be, but we'll work on that part later. At present, it's good that our own local polling is in good hands, and we all want to help you whenever we can with whatever we can help you with. So thank you, Brianna.
Thank you for the opportunity. I love talking to everybody.
Thank you, Brianna.
If Brianna came every week, we would ask her questions about this stuff every week, of course, because these questions come up again and again. Thank you all for saving your questions, digging them out. It was a very interesting discussion today. We will have our officers meeting